Hello, and welcome to this Data U presentation, documenting your data landscape for the organization. My name's Rob Loringer. I'm a senior software consultant and associate product manager. If you have any questions after the presentation, you can see my email address at the bottom of the slide. Please feel free to reach out. The agenda for today is the introduction, which we've just gone over. Talk about why you may want to document your data landscape, the key steps in documenting that landscape, and some techniques and concepts for doing so, followed by some time for Q&A. So what is the data landscape, or what do I mean by this? Well, first, just setting the stage, of course, in today's day and age, we're dealing with an incredible explosion of data. It's also often called the 3 V's: volume, velocity, and variety. So not only is data growing, but is growing at a much faster rate than it ever has, and the variety of data that's being captured is expanding, increasingly expanding. What this leads to is data sprawl throughout many organizations. Data is being captured not just in a single system anymore, but in multiple systems across the organization. Perhaps some is in the cloud, perhaps some is on mobile devices, etc. It also leads to oftentimes these information silos. Knowledge about data is confined to certain departments of the organization. That information could be quite useful if it was available to all users across, all decision makers, I should say, across the organization. So we want to break down those information silos, of course. And of course, in today's day and age, almost everyone's a data professional. And I use that maybe a little loosely, but it's hard to make a decision without some type of data to back that up in any type of role within the organization. So bringing all of these people into the fold is important for properly documenting that landscape. The key steps for documenting the landscape are strategies for getting started, and we'll go through each one of these, discovering all of the data sources around the organization, providing levels of abstraction, and centralizing the metadata so that it's easy to access. So, strategies for getting started. Number one, don't boil the ocean. Don't try to document the entire data landscape in one swoop. There's too much out there. It will take too long. It will become too frustrating, and oftentimes a project of that magnitude will fail. Take stock in what you have to work with, meaning what kind of tools do you have around your organization to begin the documentation. How are you going to create the documentation? How are you going to centralize it? How are you going to communicate it? Who knows the data best around your organization? Go and speak to those users, those individuals, and get to understand the data and data sources, data systems through their eyes. Only then can you fully create usable documentation for everyone in the organization. Next, find the squeaky wheels and start there. Find that data source that has valuable information but is not well defined. A system perhaps that is used by executive level people or managers, anyone who's making some business decisions that could benefit from better understanding the data in that system so that they can incorporate it into their decisions. Once you find those systems, document those properly, you'll garner support for your project and likely be able to continue further down the path of fully documenting your data landscape. And then come up with an approach that's most valuable to you and your organization. 3 that often come up are a bottom-up approach, meaning starting from existing systems and pulling in or reverse engineering those systems and creating documentation based off of those systems that have already been developed around your organization. A top-down method would be quite maybe different. You may need to build some data systems within your organization. Therefore, you may start as high level as interviewing business users around the organization to understand what kind of information they need to capture to make their decisions. Starting there, you may then create a conceptual model, process models, you may create a logical model, a physical model, and then ultimately implement the database systems or the data systems. Or of course, a very common approach is a middle-out approach. Oftentimes some of those systems already exist, but some of them still need to be developed or further developed. And you may start with a bit of reverse engineering, a bottom-up approach, a bit of top-down approach, as well as maybe starting with, in the middle with a logical model or a physical model of a system, and expanding out and maybe first validating with other users that the model is correct, and once that's done, expanding and implementing the database from the model. Moving on, of course, to get started, you'll want to go out, after you have your strategy, you want to go out and discover the data source systems that you have. What are those systems that are undocumented? Gain a understanding of them through reverse engineering them, and I would recommend creating some visual documentation. Many people are visual learners, and that's quite helpful, especially with database systems. Not many people are technically capable of parsing the DDL for a relational database and really understanding how it's structured. So a visual model of that can be quite helpful. And of course, we want to begin to centralize this information and make it easy to access, because once you've created this very nice documentation, it's not very helpful if it's only accessible by you or a small group of people around you. You want to give access to business users, to technical people like DBAs and developers, anyone who could benefit from viewing this documentation should be able to easily access it. So of course, creating a central location that is, one, easy for them to access, and two, is easy to update the information within the central, let's call it a repository of documentation, is important, because one, if it's not easy to access, then of course it's not usable, or people can't get to it. Two, if it's not easy to update that information, as those databases evolve, if you're not updating that documentation to reflect that, then the people who are accessing them are basing their decisions off of stale and really inaccurate information. So therefore, they aren't capable of making proper decisions. So next, let's go ahead and actually get into doing some of this. Let's start creating some of this documentation. We'll do the discovery phase of reverse engineering an existing database system, and then we'll create some levels of abstraction, because we want to present this information to varying types of users around the organization. Some of them may be highly technical, some of them may be non-technical, and so we want to create these levels of abstraction, thinking about those types of users, and then centralizing and communicating this information out to the organization. Okay, so let's get started creating our documentation. You'll see me using many of the components of the ERStudio product family, but really it's the concepts that I want as the takeaways for today. However, we'll go ahead and we'll open up ERStudio Data Architect here, where I've already gone ahead and reverse engineered a SQL Server database. When it was complete, we have a logical model and a physical model. And so let's start with the logical model. This is a model that can oftentimes be used for less technical users, maybe business users around the organization that aren't working in the database systems very often, or even users like data analysts or business intelligence professionals that are sometimes interfacing with those systems. A logical model may be important for them, where a physical model, maybe that's a view that's more important for a developer, a DBA, someone that's more hands-on with the actual database system. So let's begin to organize and abstract this logical model. Notice that if we drill into this model, you'll see that all of the names of my entities and many of the attributes are abbreviated names, and that's the first thing we want to change. We want to update these to logical names so these users who are looking at or viewing the logical model can better understand them. You could go into the model, of course, and change them one by one, but I am going to use some of the power of this tool to quickly do that using naming standards. So what I'll do very quickly here is I've done some work in the back end and created a CSV that lists logical and physical names, and you'll see those in the columns, the logical column and the physical column. So I want to update all the physical abbreviations to these logical full names. I also want to indicate that this word separation is by case. And just so we can use this, I gotta name it and save it. Now let's go ahead and apply this to our logical model. You can go ahead and actually before I want to make sure I select the template. We're converting from physical to logical names, and then let's run the translation. We'll see if it worked. It looks like those abbreviations are converted, and when we click OK, we should see that applied to our model. So there we go. We've done one of the first important steps in really abstracting or creating understandable documentation, and that's creating some business names at the logical level. But let's take this abstraction a little bit further, thinking of these business users, having them in mind. One, many of your models may contain objects from multiple subject areas around the organization, or multiple that represent multiple applications or are used by multiple applications. You may want to create views of subsets of those objects of your model that are leveraged in those specific areas. In this tool, we call those submodels. And let's go ahead and begin to create some of these. I'm going to go ahead and create one based off of sales. And what I want to do is I want all of the related objects for this sales territory entity. So quickly what I can do is create my sales submodel or sales view of just those objects. And oh darn it, no, that's not what I want to do. Now we want to take a look at defining all of these entities and attributes. It's very important to provide, of course, definitions for your objects. These names may be descriptive, but oftentimes they're not descriptive enough. So we want to provide definitions for all of our entities and attributes. That's very important for the documentation now and going into the future, because even those people who created the model over time will forget exactly what type of data may be stored in a specific model, even if it has a descriptive name. So the definition that fully describes that entity or attribute or table or column is very important. So let's go ahead and do that. You can see, first of all, I'll just point out that if I open up the employee table, there's no definition for this. We could go and add these one by one, but again, I want to use the power of this tool and leverage one of the ER Studio macros, which is the automation interface, and it'll allow me to import some definitions from an Excel spreadsheet. To do that, let's just go ahead, and I've set that up prior to today's demonstration, and I've just set up table definitions, so I'll just pull those in for now. And once that's done, we'll have definitions for, at this point, all of our entities. We do, of course, want to take this a step further and define all the attributes. I will do that at another time. Okay, so now that we've gone ahead and updated the names and provided definitions, we want to think about providing various views for different people and roles around the organization. Your model may have objects and structures that represent different subject areas or are used for different applications, etc. Perhaps you want to create a view of just a subset of entities that are leveraged in a certain subject area. So let's begin to do that. So let's create one for sales. I'm going to go and start with the sales territory. Notice on the tree you can see there's several sales related entities. So I want to get all of I want to create a view of all of those sales entities. I'm just going to go ahead and create a submodel in this tool and use some of the power of the tool to help me quickly select all the related entities to sales territory. Okay, so we've gone ahead and notice here that we have both a main model which shows everything. If we get a bird's eye view of that, you can see all 61 entities. And then we could go down to the sales territory and view all 5 entities for sales. I'm going to lay this out real quick in a hierarchical view, makes it look a little nicer. So another thing we want to think about though is on screen, what would be important information to display to various users. Perhaps those users are non-technical, and a view that shows anything beyond the name of an entity and maybe its definition may be going a little bit too far. So what we may want to do is create a view in sales of just the definitions and the entity names. So we'll go ahead and create that view here. I'm just going to resize this real quickly, relay that out. So now we quickly have a view of just entity names and their definitions. This again may be very beneficial for someone who's non-technical. Here we've created basically somewhat of a conceptual model for sales. We may want to, those attributes that we in the entities may be important to some users, but maybe not for all users. So there is another option we may think about doing in hiding some of the attributes that are maybe confusing or unimportant to someone's role. So to do that, let's create another submodel here. What I'll do in this case is create one based off of this product table and its relationships. Call this is production related entities. Now we want to go to this attribute tab because maybe in bill of materials, whoever's viewing this is not really concerned about relationships, foreign and primary keys. So let's remove those from some of these entities. And there may be even some other entities, or I'm sorry, attributes in here that are somewhat confusing or unuseful to a specific user. This actually often comes up when you're modeling a data warehouse, when you have these very large dimensions with maybe tens, if not reaching hundreds of attributes. Many of those should be hidden from view for certain people, so it doesn't sort of bog them down and confuse them. But once we've gone ahead and done that, we can create another view of production related entities and show just the attributes that are important to a certain user that may be needing to make some decisions, run some reports on products and characteristics of those products. Let's go ahead and push these production and sales submodels down to the physical model. Of course, we want maybe the same organization down at the physical level, but what we'll also do is we'll create a different level of abstraction physically. So let's go ahead and, again, I'll use just the power of this tool to help me quickly synchronize these. And let's just go to the sales submodel. Now, I haven't created any definitions in the physical level yet, so you don't see definitions for this. But no matter what, I really want to do here is create a technical view of sales for developers who may be creating some applications against the sales system. And here I want to show maybe the physical attribute order plus data type, null information, index information, and trigger information. So let's create a more technical view at the physical level, and let's just resize this and relay it out so it's easy to view. So now we can see, not just the columns, but their data types, their null option, index information. Okay, another step that you'll want to undertake during the documentation phase is thinking outside of the box. What other information is important to capture alongside of your models? We've already got some nice definitions, but there's likely some other metadata that could be important for the various users around your organization. Those could be things like security information. Is there PII that you want to document alongside of this model? Is there stewardship information that you want to document? Is there some more technical information that developers would use, maybe life cycle information? And that's actually the next step we want to move to now. I'm going to leverage a bit of the power of the tool. The tool does have some extendable metadata features, and in this tool they're stored in the data dictionary. So I'm going to go ahead and pull in some metadata tags, we call them attachments, into this model and utilize these. I have some data governance attachments I've already created. I've also got some life cycle stage attachments here, and that's what I'm going to use first off in this technical view of the sales system. So you'll see what I mean by these. Let's go ahead and start documenting whether these tables are production, development, or deprecated. So let's go ahead and move these over. Maybe many of these are production, and some are development, some are deprecated. So I'm quickly just going to document this and make maybe 3 of these table production for now. This last one here will be this furthest to the right one, I guess, is going to be development, and the last one here is going to be deprecated. So that's of course nice to document internal to this, but really what we want to do is make this visual in a way that is easily recognized by those who rely on knowing whether a table might be deprecated or whether it's still in development. So let's just go ahead and display this visually. We'll display those attachments and their values so we can see that on the model here. And then one other thing you might want to do is color code your entities so that you can visually very quickly pick out any entity that might be under development or that's deprecated, etc. So let's do that, and I'm just going to again use some of the power of the tool here to go ahead and create some some entity background colors here. So I'm defining the colors that I want a production, development, or deprecated entity to be in the spreadsheet. I'm just going to read that in and apply it to all models, because not only do I want to see it down here at this sales level, I want to see it up in the main model as well. So it will just take a moment. You can see I've colored production models yellow, development blue, and deprecated red. And if we go up to the main model, you'll see that as well. Of course, that will be important. So another thing we'll want to document is stewardship. And maybe I'll do that up here at the logical level. Again, using, in this case, the attachments, I'll go ahead and create a new attachment called Data Steward and make the value myself for now. This, of course, is very important to know for anyone who may have questions about the model or the data in the model. If those questions arise and they don't know who the steward is, then it can take quite a long time to answer that question. So if they know who to turn to with questions right away, that can be quite helpful. So I'm just going to go ahead and bind this to all of the entities and tables within this model. And again, I want to go ahead and display this on my model visually, so that if we look at the product table, for instance, we can see who the data steward is. Just relay that out, make it a little easier to read. The final topic for our discussion today will be, of course, centralization and communication. Of course, now that we've created some good documentation, we want to provide an environment similar to what we're seeing here. A way for this documentation to be easily accessible and easily updatable. It should also be user-friendly, of course, easy for people to search across the models, to track down the objects that they're looking for within those models. And so what we're using in this case is, of course, just ERStudio repository and ERStudio team server as our centralization and communication platform. I've already gone ahead and added the model to the repository. And once I've done that, of course, it's in a central hub that in the front end for end users to get into that hub and view that information is via the ERStudio team server. So let's just take a look at that. What's nice about this architecture is that it's a web front end. End users don't have to install anything. All they need to know is the URL for the team server, and they can log in and view the information. So having that ability to quickly provide an easy interface is important so that end users will actually utilize this information, the documentation that you've taken so long to create. In this case, let's go ahead just quickly to the ER Objects tab, and I'll just show you that this indeed has been centralized. Perhaps we want to look for a specific table. We want to find the production, or maybe even the production submodel. We can go ahead in here. We will discover. Let's go to the production submodel in the logical model of the diagram we've created, and of course we can see all the entities here. We can see other information about this, relationships, and even go ahead and drill into the image of the submodel. If we want to back out and see the main model, we may want to move up a level to the logical model. You can see the production and sales submodel under there, and we could go ahead and view the main model as well. What is nice about this, of course, is as we saw during the presentation, I decided to show who the steward is for this particular model. So we can see that Rob Loringer is the data steward. If we have any questions about the structure or the content of this model, we know who to turn to. If we're a technical user, like a developer, maybe we want to track down the physical model. Again, we could search for it, or we know that it's in this same AdventureWorks diagram drill down into the physical model, view its image. Perhaps we want to view the sales system entities that we created here with their proper color coding for their life cycle. So this is a central system that's easy to get to because it's a web front end. The end users don't have to install anything. What also is nice is as I add or update the models within the ERStudio repository, this front end will present that new information automatically to the end user. You don't have to manually refresh any of this information for them, which of course if you're relying on manual effort to refresh your documentation, then it's bound to become stale and therefore inaccurate. So you want to make sure that it's easy to get to, and two, that you can easily and automatically update the content within the repository or within the central hub when need be. And with that, we've come to the end of our presentation here. Let me just go ahead and bring up the slide for the key steps, just to remind you what those key steps are for documenting your data landscape for the organization. So a strategy for getting started: go out and discover what data sources you have around the organization, provide various levels of abstraction, and centralize that information so that it's easy to get to. So I want to thank everyone for taking the time to join me here today. We have some time for Q&A, so let's go ahead and take care of that. But before we jump into that, just briefly I'll note that feel free to follow the URL at the bottom of the screen to learn more about the ERStudio product family, or just go ahead and access our website at embarcadero.com and search for ERStudio. Alright, let's begin the Q&A.
The first question was, what do we do when CEO is data ignorant and wants as simple of models as possible because they completely lack an understanding of database layouts and models and want them to be almost only one table representing everything because of simplicity, which, although it's horribly unnormalized data. Rob, what's your take on that?
Well, I think they're looking for more of a very high-level conceptual model. We actually can handle that. It's not in one of the components I showed today. You can go even higher, create even higher level conceptual models than what I showed in the presentation, using another component, ERStudio Business Architect. That solution would allow you to maybe roll up a number of entities inside of a single object, single subject area object, that maybe you present that to the C-level executive, but it would also allow, when need be, to drill into it and view the more details of what entities actually make up that subject area. So I would recommend the ERStudio Business Architect to make even higher level conceptual models.
Great. I also suggested that perhaps that executive only wants to see a summarized report from ERStudio Team Server that would abstract that information out at the level that's appropriate for them, while the business decisions will be made on higher quality and more consistent data that is developed within the ERStudio Data Architect product. So,
yeah, good point.
Okay. Next question is, when you import the table definitions from Excel, does it overlay or append the definition? Can you select append or overwrite?
Good question. The particular macro that I use does allow that option. That's something that the macro interface allows you to develop into the macro. So yeah, in that particular macro I used, it did have you overwrite or append. It was an option.
Okay, good. Thanks. The next question is from Alf. Is it possible to re-engineer domains from the fields used in a model when re-engineering was not checked with guessing domains or model is built from scratch and you at a late moment want domains for those variables?
It's definitely possible. It requires a macro, and though I don't believe it ships out of the box, the macro to create domains based off of model attributes or columns, we do have that in our support team could provide that to you. So it does exist. It can be done. You just have to contact the support team to acquire that macro.
Great, thanks. Next question is, are there any data dictionary templates available, for example in Excel, that can be imported into ER Studio? What columns are generally included? And are they just the table and column names and their definitions?
We don't have any templates actually right now. We have some example data dictionaries in the sample models that install with the product, and they'll give you some ideas of some attachments, some domains, actually the security properties you can right-click on that node in the data dictionary and generate some examples by default. In the sample models that install with the product, there's a particular model called GIMDB. Take a look at that, the data dictionary in that model. It has some good examples of at least attachments, maybe the data dictionary in AdventureWorks has some domains, but yeah, right now we don't have really a specific template for that, just some examples of what would be used.
Okay. Ron had suggested that there are some default macros that are shipped with the product that can be copied and modified to include the metadata that they want.
Yeah, definitely. That's one of the nice things about those macros. You can open them up. We've done some good formatting and commenting throughout the macro, so you can tell what it's doing, what each line of code or section of code is doing. So you certainly can modify those.
Okay, great. Next question from May. If the data steward is reassigned, can this be accomplished with a mass update? Also, can the metadata beneath the entity show the parent entity in the canonical model?
So, two questions. The first one with if the steward is reassigned, the only way to do a mass update of that is, again, falling back on the macro language. I don't believe there's one already written for that. So you may have to create that yourself, or you could check with our support team. Actually, they may have that in their repository of macros that don't ship with the tool. And then for the canonical model question, was it can you see the parent entity within the child?
Yeah, can the metadata beneath the entity show the parent entity?
Well, you can certainly see relationships as part of the metadata of an entity. So you can see if you go to the relationship tab of that entity, you can see what the parent entity is for that. So you'll be able to trace it that way, and you have to get in there to verify, but there may be a way to quickly jump up into the editor of that parent if you click on the relationship.
Okay, great, thanks. Next question. Could users of the team server be notified when changes are made? For example, once a day at midnight or at some other time if changes have been made to the model?
Yeah, they can. That's part of the functionality in Team Server. It has a feature in it, somewhat like a social feature. It's got a follow option. So if it's a model you're interested in, you can follow it. And when it's updated, you'll receive you'll receive a notification in two ways. One, through your activity stream in Team Server, and two, if you set up email notifications, you can have an email sent out to you. It requires following those areas of interest to be updated, though.
Okay, great. let's see, can the import of legacy databases or files be used to help in a data conversion? Can you show it visually as a model?
I don't suppose they give us an example of a legacy database, but sure, that certainly can help. If it's a legacy database, if it's relational, I'm 99% sure we'll be able to reverse engineer it. And then from that schema, remember when you reverse engineer something in the tool, it creates a logical model as well as a physical model that represents the database. The logical model is database independent, so you have a logical schema that's representing the legacy system. One of the features in that tool in ER/Studio Data Architect is from the logical model to generate a physical model of a different DBMS platform. And so you could bring in that legacy schema and then generate a new physical schema on a new platform. So you can do the conversion. That would help with the conversion.
Okay, great. I think Ron gave an answer on that said they can be imported and shown in diagrams. Auto layout helps to create those diagrams relatively easily.
Yes,
next question. Okay, great. Next question from May. Is there an existing macro that can populate the original table name or column name before normalization begins? Table name dot column.
No, there's currently not a macro for that.
Okay. When you create a submodel, will the changes from the parent model trickle down to the submodels or child model?
Yes. Yes. When you create submodels, you're really not creating new. You're not copying those entities. It's still the same entity at the main model. It's just a sort of a refined view of those subsets of entities for that specific subject area or application that you created the submodel for. And so therefore, when you create a modification in one of those entities up in the main model, or even in any submodel where they're used, that will reflect in the other submodels.
Okay, great. Thank you. And any changes to the subject model or child model to update the parent model so that all those models are in sync? So it goes both directions?
It goes both directions, correct.
Okay.